celebrated dishes.
This is like a work of art.
Meeting the people preserving local ingredients and those adapting traditions for modern tastes.
They call people from here potatoes. Yeah.
Potato people?
Yeah.
Each recipe tells its own unique story, bringing a fresh perspective on our changing world. Join me, Nick Quick, for Discovering the World's Table. Watch on iPlayer.
At 10, we're with vital aid being airlifted into Gaza as hundreds of thousands of Palestinians continue their return home. A humanitarian convoy from the Jordanian Air Force dropping medical supplies into communities shattered by war.
We're now close to the Gaza border and should be putting down in a couple of minutes. Now, time on the ground is very limited because there are so many other helicopters waiting to come in.
Good afternoon, everybody.
President Trump's new administration holds its first media briefing and defends freezing some government spending. Wyn Evans, the BBC presenter and former Strictly contestant, says he's deeply sorry and is taking time out after what he calls his inappropriate actions.
Please open the door, we're going to open it.
A police raid as it's revealed more than 500 reported offences of child sexual abuse and exploitation in 2023 took place in hotels. And the new brain treatment that this man says is so successful, he forgets he has Parkinson's.
On Newsnight at 10:30 tonight, we'll bring you fresh insight on the stories of the day with big interviews and our regular panel of Newsnighters. And of course, look at what the papers are saying about tomorrow's news.
Hello there. Badly needed aid to help hundreds of thousands of Palestinians returning to Gaza has been airlifted into the territory, the first airdrops since the recent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Men, women and children on foot are heading back to shattered homes and communities, travelling along the coastal road into the north. Fergal Keane is the first international journalist to join an aid mission into Gaza for more than a year, flying with the Jordanian Air Force, who described conditions on the ground as horrific and inhumane. Here's his exclusive report, which does contain some distressing images.
They've been waiting for this moment. Now with the ceasefire, the airlift can begin. We joined the Jordanian Air Force first mission to Gaza since the truce. Before we left, on the ground, the loading of aid, including this consignment from Britain.
A lot of what's being brought today is medical aid, and that's absolutely crucial because the health system in Gaza has been battered.
Before we took off, there was a message from Jordan's government.
We think this is inhumane and must stop. We think Palestinians in Gaza deserve to live in dignity and to get enough support from the world at a humanitarian level.
We flew out, heading away from the base, on the hour-long journey to the Gaza Strip. We passed over Jordanian territory, then over Israel, Jordanian troops, and this possible because of a political deal.
We're now close to the Gaza border and should be putting down in a couple of minutes. Now, time on the ground is very limited because there are so many other helicopters waiting to come in. It's a very small airstrip, only two can land at a time.
We dipped and began the final approach to Gaza. This is towards the south, close to Deir al-Balah. The ruins and the desert glare, testament to more than a year of war. the Israelis pounded areas where they hunted and fought Hamas. The cost for civilians was devastating. Touchdown, 2,000 feet inside the strip. Now, from the ground, looking across the fence, we could see the devastation of Gaza. And this just one small part of a broken place.
This is the beginning of an air bridge into Gaza. There are 15 more choppers backed up, waiting to bring in badly needed aid. Across there, the ruins where tens of thousands of people took refuge. They're now in the middle of a ceasefire, hoping that it lasts so that this aid can get there.
These new images from the north of Gaza show devastation as it affects hundreds of thousands. But war is ultimately the story of what is wrought on individuals. Like Habiba al-Askari, suffering from a rare disease that has cut off the blood supply to 3 of her limbs. They have gone black. The British doctor treating her says she must leave Gaza.
We are really pushing to try and get her medevaced out of Gaza as soon as possible in order to save her life and to try and salvage whatever is possible out of her limbs.
Helicopters like the one we travelled on could offer hope for sick children. The Jordanians are ready. But healing the wounds inflicted on Gaza, that is the longest journey of all. Fergal Keane, BBC News, inside the Gaza Strip.
These two sets with me. We've got airdrops now, finally, as well as trucks ferrying in aid on the ground. But is it going to be enough for the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands returning to towns and villages that have been completely destroyed?
No. By all accounts, no. For one of the first time in 15 months, the aid, to use the word that they've been using, calling for, flowing. It's finally flowing. Hundreds of trucks every day. And now these airdrops. But the United Nations describes it, it says there has to be a massive, massive effort. For now, it's the basics. Everyone is finally getting some food, some medicine, some shelter, the basics. But Gazans don't just want the basics. They need to rebuild. And our viewers have seen those extraordinary scenes of people finally going home, going to the images we saw in Fergal's piece, into northern Gaza, a homecoming without a home. Their homes are rubble. The schools are gone. The hospitals are gone. 70% of Gaza is said to be gone. The United Nations and others say it will take years to rebuild. And what do you need for that most of all? An end to the war. For now, there's only a fragile ceasefire, with the real risk that it could fall apart when the second phase starts in a few weeks' time. And on top of that, in a few days' time, the main UN aid agency, the backbone of the aid effort, is going to be, under new Israeli law, illegal. Right. So one war is ending, many other battles are starting.
OK, a homecoming without a home. Lise, thank you. Lise Doucet, our chief international correspondent there. Now, President Trump's new administration has held its first media briefing at the White House, signalling the debut of the new press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. At 27, she's the youngest person to hold the job and promised to, in her words, provide the truth and asked the press to do the same. She said there was no more money for diversity programs and what she called wokeness, and she defended freezes to government spending.
I think this is a very responsible measure. Again, the past 4 years, we've seen the Biden administration spend money like drunken sailors. It's a big reason we've had an inflation crisis in this country. And it's incumbent upon this administration to make sure, again, that every penny is being accounted for honestly.
Caroline Leavitt there. Sarah Smith is at the White House, and you were in the press room for that briefing. How did it go?
was absolutely jam-packed as we were squeezed in there. I've never seen it so busy. Such was the level of excitement about the first press briefing of the new Trump administration. And in it, Caroline Levitt was very happy to proudly boast about what Donald Trump has achieved in his first week, including the most controversial things like that freeze on government spending. You've got agencies here saying this will be devastating for hundreds of thousands of people who rely on that government money. But nonetheless, she said it had to be in place so that Trump administration officials can go through all the budgets and see if there is any spending on things that conflict with Donald Trump's agenda, and to get rid of what she called wokeness and transgenderism in the government and make sure no money is going to any diversity and inclusion programmes. And there was no hint of defensiveness at all from the administration of Caroline Levitt today. They are proud of what they're doing, even where it is very controversial, and they're absolutely convinced that they're delivering what the American people voted for.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Sarah Smith, our North America editor there at the White House. Here, the driver of a car that crashed into a school in southwest London, killing two 8-year-old girls, has been rearrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. Selina Lau and Nuria Sajjad died in Wimbledon in July 2023. Last year, the Metropolitan Police said Claire Fremantle had suffered an epileptic seizure and wouldn't face criminal charges. The broadcaster, Wyn Evans, says he's deeply sorry and confirmed he'll be taking time off from presenting his show on BBC Radio Wales and from the Strictly Live tour. It follows controversy surrounding his behaviour and an alleged sexualised comment made during the show's live tour launch earlier this month. Here's David Silliter.
Wyn Evans, opera singer, radio presenter and long-running mustachioed star of the Go Compare ads. And also part of this year's Strictly lineup, but he's now stepping back from it all. It was during this press call for the Strictly Come Dancing live show that he was heard making a comment that he says was unacceptable. In a statement, he apologised and said, "I've agreed with the BBC that I'll take some time out from my radio show and the Strictly Live tour, as well as my other public commitments, to prioritise my well-being." It's not the first time he's made headlines after joining Strictly. When viewers saw his hand being moved from his partner's waist, they had to explain this was a joke that had been misinterpreted.
Saw him on Saturday night and just want to say sorry. It was a silly joke.
Yeah, sorry.
The Bishop of Liverpool, John Perumbalath, has tonight denied allegations he sexually assaulted a woman and had harassed another. It's the latest scandal to hit the Church of England. Ellie Price is here with more on this developing story. So what do we know?
Well, the Right Reverend Dr. John Perumbalath is accused of sexually assaulting a woman in the Chelmsford diocese on separate occasions between 2019 and 2023. Another woman, herself a bishop, has alleged that he sexually harassed her. Now, both these allegations were originally uncovered by a Channel 4 news investigation. And tonight, in a statement, the Bishop of Liverpool said the allegations set out in relation to encounters that took place in public settings with other people present. He said he consistently denied the allegations and complied with the work of the Church's national safeguarding team, and that the allegations raised in Essex were also investigated by the police, who took no further action. He added that whilst I don't believe I have done anything wrong, I have taken seriously the lessons learnt through this process, and that he will comply with any investigation deemed necessary, and that he takes safeguarding very seriously. Now, for their part, the Church of England has confirmed that it did indeed follow its investigation, that there were no ongoing safeguarding concerns, but it had identified what it described as a learning outcome with which it said that the bishop had fully engaged. Now, of course, all of this, Clive, comes following months of scandal, of accusations of cover-up, that allegations of this nature haven't exactly been well handled. And of course, that culminated in the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, last November, a role, of course, that hasn't yet been filled.
Indeed. All right, Ellie, thank you. Ellie Price there. Technology shares have regained some of their value after yesterday's record-breaking fall, sparked by a low-cost Chinese AI tool that threatens the dominance of US rivals. DeepSeek has already overtaken ChatGPT to become the most downloaded free app in America. Well, Lily Jamali is live for us now in San Francisco. Lily, what a wild ride it's been for US tech stocks.
It certainly has been, and I'm actually standing here in San Francisco in front of OpenAI's
future headquarters. OpenAI, of course, the company that brought AI into the consumer mainstream with ChatGPT. And they did that by going big, by spending big, spending $5 billion just last year. The future, however, for OpenAI and other AI competitors here in the U.S. looking potentially different than what was once envisioned. It is how Chinese developers built DeepSeek that is turning heads here in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco. They say they did it for a fraction of the cost, as well as using lower-end chips than what AI competitors here in the U.S. are accustomed to. And it is that claim that sent tech stocks into free fall on Monday. Some of those stocks have rebounded somewhat in trading on this Tuesday. Now, for his part, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is addressing the arrival of DeepSeek, calling it, quote, impressive, especially for the price, and saying he's excited to have a new competitor.
All right. Lily, thank you. Lily Jamali there, live in San Francisco. An inquest has found that a helicopter crash that killed 5 people at Leicester City's football ground, including the club's chairman, was an accident. The coroner said the crash in 2018 had been a huge loss for the families and for the community of Leicester. Here's Navtej Johal.
The aftermath of the helicopter crash at Leicester City's ground, just an hour after the end of a match. The crash claimed the lives of 5 people: the club chairman Vichai Siwatunaprapa, 2 of his employees Kavapon Punper and Nusara Suknamai, and the pilot and co-pilot Eric Swaffer and Isabella Lekovic. Martin, who was part of the maintenance team at the club, was walking to his vehicle in the car park when he noticed the helicopter, which had taken off from the pitch. It began to spin above him, as captured in this video, and he saw it crash near a car park just outside the stadium.
I've gone straight to the front of the cockpit, and I was probably 6 foot away.
6 foot away?
Yeah. And as you're looking in the cockpit, you can see things that you don't really want to be looking at. As in, there was movement inside the cockpit.
Martin then saw 2 police officers run towards the helicopter and try to smash through its window using a baton.
And then within seconds, there was a big almighty plume of black smoke. It was just pandemonium.
Everyone on board was killed. A report by the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, published in September 2023, found the crash was inevitable after a sequence of mechanical failures, and said the pilot could have done very little to save those on board. Today, an inquest concluded that the crash was an accident and that the helicopter had all its appropriate airworthiness and maintenance certificates. But afterwards, the chairman's family expressed their anger at the aircraft's manufacturer, Leonardo, against which they've launched a legal claim of more than £2 billion.
My father trusted the design of this helicopter. It was Leonardo's responsibility to make sure the helicopter was safe. It wasn't safe. It was a death trap.
In a statement, Leonardo said it agrees with the jury's conclusion that this crash was a tragic accident, and said that the helicopter was designed and produced in accordance with all regulatory requirements, meeting the accepted industry standard for safety. It also reiterated its deepest sympathies and condolences for those who lost their lives in the accident. Just 2 years on from its greatest achievement of winning the Premier League title against the odds, the crash devastated the club and the city. More than 6 years later, some are still living in its shadow. Navtej Johal, BBC News, Leicester.
Ministers have defended their decision to reject a report which advised that counter-extremism strategy should be broadened to include, among other things, violent environmentalism and the far left. It comes after parts of the report, which was commissioned by the Home Office and drawn up in the wake of last summer's riots, were leaked to the right-leaning think tank Policy Exchange. Well, Chris is here. One wonders how serious all this is. Why does it matter?
I think it matters, Clive, because it's provoked an insight into a hard-headed conversation that's been going on privately and we've got a sense of publicly today about the risks that we face and what the priorities should be in facing up to them. So when the government was first elected and before the horrific events in Southport, the government asked its officials to look at various types of extremism and how to approach them. This work was leaked to Policy Exchange. Today, Policy Exchange invited me in to see a hard copy with my notepad and pen to have a scribble down of the things that were in there. The thrust of it was to recommend action to tackle a wider range of threats to public safety: environmental extremism, left-wing extremism, misogyny, conspiracy theories, but it acknowledged that the overwhelming risk comes from Islamist extremism and indeed some from far-right extremism. Now, ministers say they're not going to change any definitions. The Conservatives say they agree with that. We got an insight as well, Clive, today into the scale of concerns the government's wrestling with. So the Security Minister telling MPs 162 people were referred to the government's anti-terror prevent programme last year for concerns relating to possible school massacres. So it's a glimpse into the risks, the range of risks and the trade-offs and the prioritisations many think are needed to face up to where the biggest dangers may lie. As far as the government's focus is concerned, tomorrow the focus will turn towards economic growth. On the programme tomorrow night, I will report and analyse on a big day for the Chancellor coming up.
Indeed. All right, Chris, thank you. Chris Mason, our political editor. And Victoria will have more details on Labour's plans for the economy over on Newsnight on BBC Two shortly. Hi there.
Hi, yes, as Chris said, a big day for the Chancellor tomorrow. She is launching the government's plan to get economic growth. Tonight, we will have a briefing on what she's going to say. We'll hear from the boss of one of Britain's biggest businesses who spent this morning with the Chancellor and the PM, and we'll also hear from a tech entrepreneur, plus voters right across the UK. That's Newsnight in about 7 or 8 minutes on BBC Two, BBC News and iPlayer. See you then.
All right, thanks, Victoria. Now, the UN peacekeeping force in the Democratic Republic of Congo has warned of ethnically motivated attacks in a region haunted by the legacy of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. Now, it's been one of the world's most bloody and prolonged wars. An estimated 5.4 million people have died since 1998, mainly from disease and starvation. The UN says there are also 6.5 million displaced people across the country. Now, the crisis stems from post-colonial battles for power, which began after the country gained independence from Belgium in 1960. Decades of conflict have been fueled by ethnic tensions, political rivalries, corruption, and fighting for control of vast natural resources. The latest phase in the conflict has deteriorated rapidly in the last year. The M23 rebel group, who are mainly from the Tutsi ethnic group, are closing in on control of the regional capital, Goma. They say they needed to protect the rights of the minority group there. Well, Barbara Pletasha has the very latest.
Gunfire in Goma today. The UN says bodies are lying in the streets of the city, the capital of eastern Congo. Hundreds have been injured, hospitals are overwhelmed, reports of rapes committed by combatants. Rebels from the M23 militia began fighting for control of Goma after a lightning advance against the army. Now people huddle indoors facing cuts in power, water, internet, food shortages. It's a major escalation after years of conflict in this region. Some of the heaviest fighting at the airport. Reports now that M23 has gained control. 3 South African peacekeepers were killed here. In total, 17 from 3 different countries have died. Goma's been a hub for the region's victims, hundreds of thousands displaced by endless war. Now they're on the move again. Anyone who's able to flee is escaping the city. Hundreds are crossing the border into neighboring Rwanda, desperately seeking safety. But there's anger against Rwanda in the Congolese capital, Kinshasa. Protesters accuse it of backing M23. They set the Rwandan embassy on fire, also targeting others seen as failing to stop the fighting. Rwanda denies it's directly involved, despite UN evidence that it is. On the ground, the burden of fear compounds the misery of lives already scarred by relentless loss and grinding insecurity. It's the worst escalation of this conflict in more than a decade. There are fears it will trigger a wider regional war. Barbara Platt-Usher, BBC News, Nairobi.
New studies suggest climate change was a major factor in the recent devastating wildfires in Los Angeles. Decades of droughts followed by heavy rainfall made vegetation across the city and surrounding areas more vulnerable to fire, as Justin Rolat explains.
At last, it has rained in LA, and it brought mudslides that blocked a major road. but also means more people can return home because after 3 long weeks, the wildfires are finally being brought under control.
I'm anxious to see, what I can get out of there.
Today's study, produced by a team here at Imperial College London, found the hot and dry conditions that drove the fire were made a third more likely by human-caused climate change. It said the chances of the low autumn and winter rainfall that preceded the fire had more than doubled since the pre-industrial era. The scientists also found climate change means fire-prone conditions are now likely to persist for 23 days longer, increasing the chances fires will coincide with the strong seasonal winds. But the study was complex and the findings uncertain.
It's got mountains on one side, it's got the coast on the other, it's got desert, and we know that the rainfall is variable in this region. But we've looked at different elements of the weather that are feeding into the likelihood of these fires, and all of those strands of evidence are pointing in the same direction and suggesting that, yes, climate change has played a role in this event.
It comes just days after President Trump visited LA, having comprehensively shredded US climate policy. He has, however, vowed the city will be rebuilt. Justin Rolat, BBC News.
The BBC has seen new figures from the police revealing there were more than 500 reported offences of child sexual abuse and exploitation in 2023, which took place in hotels in England and Wales. The National Police Chiefs Council says more than 90% of the cases involved reports of physical contact with a child and 40% were reported as rape. Hotels can be used by offenders because of the anonymity they provide, and now the police are working with the hotel industry to try to help spot signs of abuse. Seema Katecha's report contains some distressing details.
Police emergency. There's a man with an underage girl that have managed to gain access to one of our rooms.
A hotel member of staff calls the police.
So there's a 14-year-old girl with an overage man in the hotel, and we need the police to come.
Hello, it's the police. Open the door.
Then officers storm the room.
Why have you not just answered the door to us? Why have you not just answered the door?
Moments later,
we're going to be further arrested on suspicion of sexual activity with a child, OK? So the same.
Police chiefs say they've identified more than 500 cases like this in hotels over a one-year period, often low-budget hotels close to train stations and motorways. Here are the words of one female victim.
The abuse was something I'll never get over. It happened over and over again in different hotels. I was given drink, and then he did it and left.
Officers are now teaching hotel staff how to spot the signs of potential child abuse. Things like an adult with a nervous-looking child or the perpetrator refusing to be ID'd and wanting to pay in cash.
Once you're behind that hotel bedroom door, there's a degree of privacy that perpetrators often don't find elsewhere when they commit abuse. So we're talking about some of the most serious contact offending imaginable, the rape and serious sexual abuse of children.
It's going to need a decent follow-up, this one.
We're on an operation with Greater Manchester Police. The idea is to see how easy it is for a pretend perpetrator and victim to get a room.
It's going to involve a police officer and a child volunteer going to the booking desk of the hotel, trying to book a hotel room for cash, showing no signs of identification.
20 minutes after the first test, and we learn how the hotel reacted.
Well, they did try and push to get a room, but they did not supply a room.
So the person behind the desk at the hotel wouldn't give the fake perpetrator a double room because he was only willing to pay cash and wouldn't show them any identification. That is the right thing to do, police say, but they would have preferred if the hotelier had actually called the police because they had seen a suspicious man with a child.
How was the male acting with the girl?
Another 999 call after a hotel staffer becomes suspicious.
It was acting like it was controlling the girl, like as I read the situation, like the girl had no choice rather than to follow him.
A crime happening in plain sight that police say could be the tip of the iceberg, with some of these offences unreported. Seema Katecha, BBC News, Manchester.
And details of organisations which offer information and support are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information. That's on 0800 077 077. Now, a story of hope and Parkinson's disease. A man who's had a pioneering computer-controlled implant fitted into his brain to help cope with the condition says it works so well he sometimes forgets he has Parkinson's. Kevin Hill, who's 65 and from Sunderland, says the operation was such a success he feels like he's been cured. Sharon Barber has that story.
Going out on his bike, something that Kevin Hill thought he'd never be able to do again. Parkinson's had taken his body away from his control. And unable to hold a pint, in the end, he stopped going out altogether. While at home, he was banned from the kitchen.
I dropped things, spilled things, hot water.
Who banned you?
The wife. I took the tip of my finger off, couldn't peel a potato.
But in a remarkable transformation, this is Kevin today, thanks to a small computer in his chest. Well, Kevin described it as like a Jaffa cake inside his chest wall, but what it is, in fact, is a battery with a computer inside, and that sends signals to his brain to control his Parkinson's symptoms. He had that deep brain stimulation system fitted a year ago, but now he's one of the first patients in the world to get a new program installed.
The bits that were put into the brain itself are these little wires, and as you can see, they're very small to make sure we can hit a target that's about the size of a grain of rice. Once we've done that, we can understand where we want their brain signals to be.
When Kevin first had his computer in his chest switched on, he couldn't believe what happened.
It was instant. My hand just stopped shaking, my legs stopped shaking. My voice was better. My wife's been very good about it, but it must be hard for her. But when they turned it on, the DBS, and my tremor stopped, she was crying. Sometimes I do feel cured. I forget about Parkinson's for days and days and days.
Sharon Barber, BBC News.
And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
Runways, railways and roads. The Chancellor makes her big speech tomorrow on how she'll get the economy going. We've got a preview. And we'll ask two leading business people, is growth finally about to touch down in the UK? Hi, welcome to Newsnight, live from Broadcasting House each weeknight. Tonight, bringing you insight and expertise, is tech entrepreneur Alex de Pledge. She introduced the Chancellor on stage at the Labour Party conference last autumn. Also with us, Rupert Harrison, economist and former Chief of Staff to Conservative Chancellor George Osborne. And in a moment, we'll talk to the CEO of Sage, which provides back-office software for small and medium-sized businesses and is one of the UK's biggest employers. He had breakfast with the Chancellor and PM in Downing Street this morning. So is he convinced by the latest growth talk from them? And Nick is also here, of course. And news in the last couple of minutes from the Treasury about some of the stuff that will be in Rachel Reeves' speech tomorrow.
That's right. In the last few minutes, hot off the press, we have the Chancellor in a speech tomorrow. She's going to say they're going to go further and faster on growth. And she is going to announce that they are pledging to add an extra £78 billion to the UK economy by 2035, by, she says, unleashing the potential of the Oxford to Cambridge growth corridor. What are we going to have? Better transport links, funding for the East-West Rail, with new services between Oxford and Milton Keynes this year, and upgrading the A428 to reduce journey times between Milton Keynes and Cambridge. Now, Let's set this in a bit of historical context. I can remember being, I think it was the Conservative conference in 2012, where David Cameron said, let's re-establish the varsity rail line between Oxford and Cambridge. Has that happened? I think he got as far as Oxford to Bletchley, so we're not quite there. That was in 2012. And I can remember 26 years ago when Peter Mandelson, in his first stint as business secretary, went to the Silicon Fen in Cambridge and said, this is the future of the UK economy. So we sort of have been, excuse the pun, round this track before.
What else are we expecting her to say in the morning?
Well, we don't have any confirmation of this, but we think that we will be hearing of airport expansion, using the emergency runway at Gatwick for normal flights and more terminals at Luton. But the big one, not confirmed, is it looks like we will get the government saying OK to the third runway at Heathrow Airport. The crucial thing about that, though, is that's not start building the end of this week. That is the government saying yes, and then it will be a very, very long process of Heathrow Airport doing that. Interestingly, another thing, we were talking last night here about if you're really serious about growth, would you reverse the Rishi Sunak decision and do a form of HS2 north of Birmingham, perhaps a cheaper version? We were told, no, you can't do that because the land had been sold. From another part of government, we're told, no, the land hasn't been sold. And Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, who's a bit of a rail buff, would still like to do it, still on the table for her. And at the spending review in June, she'd like to have a push on that, but knows that it'll be really difficult.
OK. Well, in a sec, we will hear from our panel, but what does growth mean to you? Do let me know. You can WhatsApp me on 03306 784 783 with your name and where you are in the UK. What do you need to see in your life to convince you that the UK economy is doing better?
So the economy would look better to me and my company and the driving instructors if the fuel prices came down, if the insurances came down, if the maintenance came down, if the cost of dual controls came down, we wouldn't have to increase our prices for lessons.
I think for me, I really want to see the Chancellor introduce some initiatives to help mitigate the costs that employers are going to face, because ultimately I don't understand how we can see our economy growing when employers are reducing the workforces that they've got. At the end of the day, without employment rising, people have got less money to spend.
Well, I'm a pensioner and I lost the £300 this year because I don't claim any benefits at all. I would like to see that reinstated for those people that really do need it. I think that that was the terrible thing to do. I would also expect people to be spending more money in the shops, buying more goods in the shops.
I think for me and everyone I know, the economy is really difficult at the moment for everyone I know. I think any normal working family that gets a salary, things have changed significantly over the past couple of years. Quality of life and living we're making different decisions now. So whereas you might be able to treat yourself, you really got to think before you're spending.
So that's what voters want. Alex to pledge, Rupert Harrison. Do you think Rachel Reeves' plans are going to deliver that for them?
In the immediate term, no. I think ultimately, since 2008, we've had very little growth. We've been talking about this for a long time. We put it down to lack of productivity. We can't agree on what is causing that lack of productivity. So I don't see any silver bullets from anyone, not just this government, from anyone that's going to get us growth in the next 2 to 4 years. What I can see is leading indicators starting to come through in that time. But I think we have to be really honest with the British public that there is no silver bullet, and growth is not going to just miraculously appear. But I think what is important is that we do something and we lay the foundations now. And for a long time, we've hesitated about doing that. And some of these initiatives that are on the table now are a great step in the right direction.
What do you think, Rupert Harrison?
Well, look, all of these things that Nick talked about that are going to be in the speech tomorrow, they're good things, right? The Oxford to Cambridge arc, that is exactly the right place we should be investing. Expanding our airports, that is definitely a good idea. Both parties in government have said they're going to do that and then dropped it. The problem is, it's going to take a very long time. These things take decades, and the problem is you've got a government that's 7 months in, and we heard two of your vox pops there. You know, what actually is hitting growth right now is raising employers' national insurance on businesses and taking money out of people's pockets, like the winter fuel payment. And so there's a huge mismatch here between 7 months in, suddenly scrambling for a bunch of growth announcements, dusting off a bunch of stuff that basically was cancelled a couple of years ago under political pressure by the last government, and saying we're going to do it after all. May be good in itself, but it doesn't really rise to the scale of the challenge.
You said maybe decades. Nick, did you say 2035? 78 billion will be added to the UK economy by 2035.
Chancellor to unveil plans to unleash the potential of the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor that will add up to 78 billion to the UK economy by 2035, according to industry experts.
Right. So people, I mean, I can remember interviewing, sorry, I beg your pardon, when he was in opposition, leader of Labour, 2023 Labour Party conference in Liverpool, I pressed Keir Starmer on how long growth was going to take. Asked a couple of times. Eventually he said, look, I believe we can do it quickly. How long? Within months. Now we are 7 months in, there's been no growth since July, pretty much. Are voters, I mean, they're not going to wait that long, are they?
I mean, look, I think if we were an isolated case, then I would have some sympathy with the argument that we need to do things quicker. But this is something that's plaguing all of Western societies. Like, Europe's not in any better position than we are. So this is a systemic thing that's not just impacting the UK, and we don't live in isolation. Like, we are part of a global economy, and we're all grappling with this. So if Keir Starmer did indeed say that, I think that was probably a little bit misguided and naive. I don't think that this is a chronic problem that we've been trying to solve, and I just don't think there are any quick solutions, and we need to be really honest about that.
I mean, the Conservatives didn't solve it, did they? They had pretty poor growth over 14 years.
No, and that's right, in the sense that it's a global issue, and basically since about the year 2000, all of our economies have started growing more slowly than they did. In recent years, the US has become the big exception, where technology, investment and the excitement in the US economy has just taken off relative to Europe.
And the natural resources.
And of course, they've got lower energy prices, lots of natural gas, things like that that we don't have, or we certainly don't have now. I think your question is a really good one, which is, are voters going to wait that long? I think voters will reward a government if they sense that there's a coherent plan, it's going to take time, but they're taking the tough decisions and they can see the payoff coming down the future. That doesn't look like that when you had several years, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, before the election to come in, with a growth plan. And they clearly didn't have a growth plan. And then 7 months after being elected, they've kind of suddenly cobbled together, the Oxford to Cambridge growth arc. It's not very impressive. Now, they still do have time to put together a serious growth plan, but, we're about a week into it and we should be 7 months into it.
The political challenge is that they wanted to follow what you did with George Osborne, which was blame the previous lot for the so-called mess. They did that for the first 6 months. It all looked very gloomy, and they've come back. Clearly, they've had a few extra Weetabix with their turkey over the Christmas period and are saying we've really got to move fast and look like sort of, here are the sunlit uplands, this is what we're going to do. It's clearly a gear change they've realised.
But it's sort of assuming that they can't walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, if you could have come in, blamed your predecessors and hit the ground running with the growth plan, which actually, if you go back to 2010, that's what we did. We dealt with the deficit, but we also cut corporation tax. There are incentives for people to employ people, cut regulations. It's just mystifying to me that it's taken 7 months to even come up with this.
Fair enough. We'll talk more in a sec, because earlier today, Sir Keir Starmer was asked about the government's intentions over that third runway at Heathrow. He had this to say.
Well, I'm not going to speculate about Heathrow and any decision there. What I will say is that growth is the #1 priority of this government. Economic growth, wealth creation, making sure that people are better off. Of course, we also have climate commitments, but growth is really important to our agenda.
Joining us on the sofa alongside Alex and Rupert is the director of the Good Growth Foundation, Praful Nargand. We'll talk to him about a new report from his think tank in a moment. But first, let's speak to one of those invited to a breakfast with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister this morning, Steve Hare. He's the CEO of Sage. It provides back-office software for small and medium-sized businesses based in Newcastle upon Tyne. Huge employer with around 11,000 staff. Welcome to Newsnight, Mr Hare. So you were there at that breakfast meeting. Were you convinced by what you heard from the Prime Minister and Chancellor?
Well, I think like some of the panel have already said, the intent's there. I mean, I think, you know, both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have said growth very much hardwired into the agenda.
Do you believe them?
But as everyone's saying, we need to see the output. And I know these things take a long time, but you need to show the intent. You need to show real deliverables in the short term. I think people need to see action.
OK. What will action look like then to you?
So, I mean, small, mid-sized businesses are half the economy. So if you want the economy to grow, as well as investing in infrastructure and so on, you need to create the right environment for small, mid-sized businesses to grow. And a lot of that is about confidence. There is capital to invest. Small, mid-sized businesses can access capital, but they're very reluctant to invest when there is an uncertain environment and so much negativity.
Right. And why is there an uncertain environment and so much negativity?
Because I think, you know, as the rest of the panel have been talking about, people are unsure, you know, what's going to happen with inflation, you know, what's happening with their input costs, etc. But I think, you know, whenever I talk to customers, they're really focused on how they can grow their businesses. And I think, you know, we need to take a little bit of a leaf out of the US book. You know, the US is a different economy. It's a very large economy. But it's also an economy which is hugely optimistic. People talk up their prospects, whereas we tend to talk them down.
So Rachel Reeves needs to be a bit more Donald Trump?
Well, I don't know about being Donald Trump, but I think, you know...
But whatever you think of him and his policies,
yeah,
in terms of the way he talks about, in an excited and excitable way about the prospects.
I think sometimes you have to talk things up. And look, a lot of what Donald Trump is doing at the moment, signing the orders, a lot of them won't actually turn into anything. But he's showing the intent that he wants action, he wants... And when I talk to businesses in the US, they think the economy is going to really boom.
Yeah. You have 11,000 employees. Can I ask you how much the national insurance rise coming in April is going to cost your company per year?
Yeah, so we only have, of the 11,000, we have about 3,000 in the UK. So it's costing us some tens of millions, but compared to some of the big retailers who employ hundreds of thousands of people, it hasn't had such a big impact on us.
Right. I mean, some of those big retailers were there at that meeting today, Tesco and BT, Vodafone. Tesco have already said that the national insurance rise, it's inevitable. That is going to cause job losses. What was the mood like amongst those business leaders with the Prime Minister and Chancellor?
I think the mood is very much there's a trade-off. So obviously there's the negativity of the costs. But if the government can free up planning, if the government can free up some of the regulation and therefore, you know, everyone can grow their businesses faster because they can get things done faster, then they can do things to compensate for those additional costs. But without the growth, then it becomes a huge negative drag.
Nick's told us, you know, Oxford and Cambridge rail route, new roads, housing developments, third runway at Heathrow likely. You're based in Newcastle upon Tyne, you live in Yorkshire. It's not exactly levelling up across the country, is it?
Yeah, so I think the investment in the regions is really important. Obviously, you know, if we get infrastructure projects that drive skills, so, you know, for example, you know, if they eventually do the runway, a bit like when they did Terminal 5, that created a lot of new jobs. It created training for lots of tradespeople who were coming down from the north to work on that building site. But in the end, people want to see things happening close to them. They want to see their environments thriving. They want to see people setting up new businesses. You know, infrastructure projects are great, but they're distant from people's local communities. They need to see the environment in their community. They want to see that thriving.
I mean, let me ask you, Alex DePledge, you're from Bradford originally. If you're watching tonight in Aberdeen, Rochdale, Wallsend, you know, you name your fabulous place in the north of the UK, you might be thinking, oh my God, all this stuff is going to the southeast again.
But I mean, we've been trying to level up since, you know, the closures of the mills like 70, 80 years ago, and no government has managed to do it. So I think this is not the end of the growth agenda, I wouldn't hope. So I think it's probably right to look at where the greatest economic clout is. And unfortunately, at the minute, it is in London and the southeast. We have an amazing, you know, the triangle of Oxford and Cambridge is really thriving, and we do the right thing to double down on that. And then you can look at things afterwards. I mean, you know, I would have rather HS2 wasn't cancelled due to bats. I mean, I make a joke, but it's quite a serious one. But
are you hacked off about that?
I mean, don't get me started on bats. But yes,
Okay.
but yes, HS2. I think that's been the first major rail link for a long, long time, and we've managed to get it as far as Birmingham. So I think that was a mistake, but the costs thing was obviously equally a mistake. But yeah, I think my main point is levelling up is very hard to do. Successive governments have been trying to do it for decades, and I think we should definitely have one eye on it. But I think it's right to start in the south because that's where most of the commerce is, and then hopefully that growth agenda can stretch towards the north and bring in some of those counties that desperately need that investment.
I can hear Northerners and Scots going, it's not always right to start in the south. I take your point. Rupert Harrison, what do you think about the north-south thing?
Well, look, there's a huge amount of exciting stuff happening in the north just because this speech is about the south of England.
But this is a big signalling speech, a big messaging speech, isn't it?
If you were sitting in Downing Street, it's politically unfortunate that your big announcements tomorrow
are talking about Old Trafford. They're talking about Glasgow.
They've tried to shoehorn some stuff in.
West Midlands.
But of course,
to be fair to them.
the runways announcement is all going to be very southern focused, and I'm sure that that's not ideal from a political point of view. But there's a huge amount. If you wanted to expand this, airports and connectivity is hugely important in the north of England. The Transpennine rail situation is a disaster. We've had governments from both parties talking about that for years, not delivering an improvement in particularly the east-west connectivity within the north of England.
Boris Johnson promised it, then changed his mind.
Exactly, and so coming back to what Steve was saying, in the end, what businesses are going to look for is the delivery. We have had 2 prime ministers within the last 20 years saying they were going to build a 3rd runway at Heathrow, and it hasn't got off the ground. No pun intended. But, they've got to deliver this stuff. They've got to, see through the opposition from the Bats Protection League or whatever sort of, interest group is going to throw up the objections. And that's when it's going to get tough down the line. You can give the speech on the day, but 5 years down the line, when you're stuck in the legal challenge, have you got the political will to see it through?
To give you a bit of positivity, some of our best AI engineers are in Newcastle.
How do you know that? Who says?
Because we benchmark them across the globe. We have people in California, we have people across the US, we have people in India, we have people in Europe, we have people in Newcastle. And we have a head of engineering who's an American who used to work for Microsoft. And he looks across all of our organisation and he says the people that we hire in Newcastle through our partnership with Newcastle University are amongst the best in the world.
If I might just add on this particular topic, in the research, which we'll talk about later, one of the things we found is on these big infrastructure projects, people do feel they are a bit more distant, actually. And in a way, for a government that's going for growth, that's liberating, because you can actually just focus on, in the beginning, where you'll get the quickest returns for the economy, and then focus that growth and the benefits from that growth on the things that really matter to people, which are far more personal. So if you can train up a bunch of people to work in AI all over the country, and I was born in Bradford, so, I want to see the growth all across the country too, that will resonate with people. That's the kind of thing voters want to see. Skills that give them the chance to access those jobs. Healthier lives so they can actually be productive to work, or even the transport to get to opportunities. It's not just about the infrastructure project, it's how it connects to communities across the country.
Vic, let me just throw this in. I should say, in an article in the Times tomorrow, Keir Starmer talks about clearing away the thickets and the weeds of regulation. And who does he compare himself to? Margaret Thatcher. He talks about how we've got to move the accelerator. He says in the 1980s, the Thatcher government deregulated finance capital. Also talks about Tony Blair in the new Labour era. Globalisation increased the opportunities for trade. This is our equivalent.
OK, that's interesting. Can I mention Brexit, if I may? Is there an incoherence with the Labour strategy, talking about ripping up the bureaucracy, getting rid of the regulations, and of course the Brexit trading arrangements the UK has with the EU mean there are added costs for UK exporters, but there's no real conversation, no meaningful conversation about getting rid of those costs. Does that strike you as odd or not?
Why would you say there's no conversation at all? I mean, Rachel Reeves has already said she'd like a reset on that relationship. Andrew Bailey came out quite a few months ago and said, look, this is weighing on the UK economy. Politically, it doesn't make sense to be having a negotiation now. But one of the things actually our foundation looked at is public attitudes have shifted a bit. Post-Brexit Britain isn't anti-Europe. I mean, right after Donald Trump's election, we looked at which partner does the country want? And actually, overwhelmingly, they said the EU. So there's actually that possibility to open the door further. And that could have huge benefits to the SMEs that Steve was talking about, because they are the ones in particular that have struggled the most post-Brexit.
OK. Thank you, Mr Hare. Thank you very much for coming on Newsnight. Will you come back?
I will, if you invite me.
Oh, well, we may well do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's talk more about this report from the Good Growth Foundation, from Prafful's organisation. He is a director there. He's a former Labour parliamentary candidate. Nick, we've both read it. Tell our audience what's in it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't want to put words in Prafful's mouth, but I think it's fair to say he is a supporter of Keir Starmer, and I would have to say that this report is rather mixed reading for the Prime Minister. So let's just look at its 3 core findings. So in the first place, there you go, Prafful's great phrase, mind the growth gap. What that means is how do you avoid making the mistake of these two, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who said to voters, look at this amazing economic growth, and the electorate said back, what growth? So let's look at the second table. So you avoid their fate by focusing on things that really have an impact on people's lives. That is what Prafful calls intuitive growth. That is like skills and training, healthcare, and then transport. If we look at our final table, you fall into that Biden trap by focusing on areas that may not directly relate to people's lives. Prafful calls that less intuitive growth. What is on his list? Clean power, devolution, and house building. What are the top 3 items on Keir Starmer's list? It's exactly those. Prafful's not saying they're a bad idea, but you've just got to explain them and sell them in a way that people understand and makes their lives feel better.
Yeah. And we began the programme, actually, by asking people, what does growth mean to you? You know, how does it translate to your real life? Couple of messages here. Jack from Stafford says, bear with me while I put my specs on, I'm a hospitality business owner with multiple sites, and the huge impact about to hit on business rates relief is going to completely stop any chance of us being able to expand our business and grow. And John says, I've got a dry cleaners in Leicestershire. I would like to see the energy prices come down. The cost of energy is unsustainable. And Philip in Buxton, growth would look like investment in transport in the north, HS2 and the Trans-Pennine links. Now, from the thousands of people you spoke to for this report, what do you say Labour needs to do differently? What's your advice to them?
I mean, it's worth starting with what is the heart of the economic question for the public, and especially for the voters that win elections in this country, which is very much cost of living still. It is the alpha and omega of the economy. It's a culprit in the minds of the public for poor economic growth. It's the marker by which success will be judged. And that lends a clue as to why there are certain areas that are more intuitive, things that are personal, things that are viscerally experienced, are the kinds of growth levers that people really, really feel will change their lives and hopefully lead to an improved living standard.
So in terms of these big infrastructure projects that we've been discussing this evening, can you explain how they will potentially increase people's wage packets or address the cost of living pressures?
Yeah, I mean, look, Britain's growth problem, it's sort of worse than most people think, right? Because you actually have to grow the economy, which is quite hard. And you've also got to deal with this growth gap where actually politicians might struggle to get credit for it. On the former part, you do need to drive investment, and that's what all of these announcements are driving towards. But when it comes to things that are a bit more distant, so take house building, it's not a bad policy. It's incredibly important if you want to increase affordability and actually get building to happen. But it isn't something that people naturally draw a connection to economic growth. They see how it might benefit developers or the people who live in those homes. And so actually, they don't see how it might benefit them. So look, in a way that's liberating. You can build the homes in the areas where actually you'll get economic growth. But also, you can think about where you can intersect with, for example, the cost of living. So build in the places where affordability is going to be a real, a big chunk of affordability will be taken out.
So are you saying it's as straightforward as saying, we're going to build a load of houses, or that's the plan, and the reason that we're doing that is because that increases the supply and that will bring down the cost of a house?
Well, I think if you prioritise that, so Oxcam is very much on the agenda. That's an area where there are huge affordability problems. If you build there, you might actually get some political reward for it. And even if you don't, you'll actually get the growth which you can then use to spend on the skills, health and transport that people really care about.
I mean, when you describe it like that, it sounds pretty straightforward. But as we know, governments have been trying to do this for decades and not achieving massive levels of growth. So why will it be different this time?
I mean, I don't really know how to answer that question, because the bit that I always kind of get a bit stuck on, and I think we probably all do, is I'm not sure where the people are coming from to build all of this stuff?
It's a great question.
So to build all of the houses...
Have we got the tradespeople?
And I think it links to your point around coherence. Like, you can tell a story about house building and you can tell a story about unblocking planning, which I think is great, even though I think there's some problems that are not yet fixed in that area for them. But once you do all of that, who are the people that are going to build the houses? And so there's the immigration question that comes back in, there's the skills and training that comes back in, and that's the piece, these doctors and nurses, these builders, these engineers, this is the question, for me, the burning question to make sense out of it all. And I feel like that's the bit that's missing. So it's great that we've got this long-term growth agenda, but there's still this quite big gap for me.
But it's also that massive opportunity, right? You know, there is an opportunity if you get this infrastructure built or building to skill up the nation and actually have the people ready to do the work. Well, you can, you know, I mean, talk about green power, for example, something that was maybe a bit less intuitive. I mean, I visited a green skills camp in the northeast last year. 6 weeks, they're training people to go and work in entry-level positions in offshore wind. That's transformative in a number of weeks. You can actually do a lot more of this training quickly, but you got to lever it and make it happen and tell a story about it.
You've got to make it happen, and then the effects will be seen. So Keir Starmer's new hero, Margaret Thatcher, said that she wasn't interested in popular policy. She was
Tony Blair's his hero as well.
And Gordon Brown's, actually, in 2007. You remember the Thatcher phase. But she wasn't interested in popular policies. She was interested in policies that had popular effects. And that's where building the houses and then people can buy the home, creating the jobs, people find the wages going up. You've got to start early, which is, you know, the problem with 7 months already wasted.
And if you want to carry on watching Newsnight, please turn over to BBC Two or watch on iPlayer.
Do stay with us here on BBC News for all the latest headlines in the US and around the world from the team here in Washington.
Live from London, this is BBC News. A US judge temporarily blocks parts of a federal funding freeze ordered by the Trump